We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 47, Invasion of the Mork Snatchers. This first aired on March 20th, 1980. The IMDb synopsis is, Mork becomes so hopelessly addicted to advertisements that they invade his dreams. This was the 38th episode directed by Howard Storm, the 11th written by Tom Tenowich, and the 9th by Ed Sharlock. There's a sunny exterior of the house, and surprisingly there are flowers. Mindy is cooking in the kitchen. Someone bangs on the door, so she goes to answer. Mork enters carrying 3 full bags of groceries. She asks him where he's been. He went to the supermarket like he told her.
Yeah, but that was over an hour ago. All you were supposed to get was a carton of milk.
I know, but boy, are you in for a surprise.
I don't have time for surprises right now.
Oh, you mean you don't have time for the new candy? 3 Mile Mints, the nuclear chocolate? They melt down, but not in your mouth. An eye wash?
I wash.
Yeah, that's the easy part. The hard part is hanging them out to dry. Some disposable diapers?
Mark, I don't have a baby.
Oh, that's why they're disposable. Well, here we have a little bird seed, so now we can grow a canary. Oh, here we have Bi-Gel, the new antacid that goes both ways. Oh, no, a squash. Let's see. Oh, faulty advertising. Mr. Nader's going to hear about that. And now for the gourmet with no teeth, liquid steak. A good meal is just a suck away. Here we have a virgin wool sweater. How do they know it's virgin? Oh, and now I've got something in loose cereal called sugar-coated Jimmy's. Just add milk and the economy inflates. And we have this brand new insecticide, says here, guaranteed to kill bugs. Oops, there's one right now. Aha!
We have another reference to 3 Mile Island with 3 Mile Mints, the nuclear chocolate. There is a bisexuality joke with Bi-Gel, the new antacid that goes both ways. There's a reference to Ralph Nader. There's another sex joke with him talking about virgin wool. And there's a political joke with the sugar-coated Jimmy's referring to the president. She again says that all she wanted was a carton of milk. She's got to whip these potatoes. He says all they need is a rack of lamb and they'll have a real kinky meal. He starts taking cartons out of one of the bags and setting them on the counter. He's got the history of milk. White plain milk, chocolate milk, and yes, he does it with a black voice saying, "My main lactose, what's happening?" There's also just simply milk, old milk, sour milk, which makes him say icky ick and makes me wonder why the store is selling sour milk, and Ghost of Milk Past. She says he bought every kind there is. He says he thought that to fit into society you have to be a consumer, so he jumped in with both feet. She says he'll have to learn to keep his feet out of his wallet. He says how can he? Even when he was leaving the store, they were all saying bye. She says he's going to have to develop better judgment. The average earthling doesn't become a buyaholic. A couple things about that. One is this continues the theme of her trying to help him become human. And also there is a definite parallel drawn here, as the IMDb synopsis suggested, between being a shopaholic, as it would have been called later, and addiction. He says he's never been exposed to advertising before. She says she thought the Orkans picked up the Earth TV signals. She says they do, but they're not stupid. They divert the commercials to other planets. That's why all the UFOs come here, to shop. She says he's fairly new at it. He doesn't know how to handle it. He'd better learn before he spends them out of house and home. He says he thought advertising was good for you, which doesn't explain why the Orkans would be diverting it. Without it, how can you know what you can't live without? She thinks he ought to lay off advertising for a while. Not just the TV, but the radio, newspapers, and these magazines. He swears he only reads them for the naked ladies, so a Playboy joke. She asks why there are crumbs all over the ads. He says that she, meaning one of the naked ladies, was well bred, so a pun. And I have to point out that on one of the magazines we can see a picture of Robin Williams' dear friend Christopher Reeve in his Superman costume. Mindy is worried about him. He's starting to lose control of himself. He scoffs and Bark laughs. Someone knocks. He opens the door. It's his other groceries. The delivery guy gives him 2 bags, then holds out his hand for a tip. So Mork gives him a roll of toilet paper. He tells him to not squeeze it all in one place, so a reference to Please Don't Squeeze the Charmin. After the delivery guy leaves, Mork closes the door. Mindy says that's it, no more ads from Mork. Mork says that's all right, he still has Mr. Video, and she reminds him that there's no TV either. Mork sits on a magazine, but she catches him and has him handed over. She's gathering up all the newspapers and magazines she can find. He says heavy sigh, which is the first one of those stage direction lines that we've had in a while. He says here he is in a media society, forced to sit on his ads. Just getting that past the censor, ads instead of ass. But also a pun in the sense that he's forced to sit on something in the sense of containing it. The doorbell rings. She thinks it's Remo, but Mork hopes it's a traveling salesman. She stirs what she's cooking in the pot while he answers the door. It is Remo, and he gets some mild applause, just like Jeannie did recently. He and Mork go back and forth, punching each other's shoulders and saying, "Hey Morko, hey Remo," and it keeps escalating until Mork punches Remo's head with both hands, and Remo says, "Don't do that." And it always amazes me the patience that Remo has with Mork. And we get a bit of exposition with Remo saying, "Sorry about my sister Jeannie, but she couldn't pass up the chance to see her first operation." Of course, in real life, since he only has one sister, he wouldn't be saying my sister Jeannie. They all know who Jeannie is. This is a reminder that she is in med school. And I'm not sure why Gina Hecht isn't in this episode. Certainly she could have appeared in the nightmare sequence later. They felt they needed to explain that Mork and Mindy wouldn't just invite Remo over without Jeannie, even though we've seen that Mindy will invite Jeannie over without Remo. Mindy asks if Jeannie will show up later. Remo rhetorically asks, "Could you eat after somebody handed you an adenoid?" And then he's amused by this, and Mork laughs. Speaking of eating, he brought her something for dinner, and it's a bottle of ketchup. He says it goes well with either meat or fish. Mork says, "Oh, Red Nun," which is a reference to the Blue Nun wine, which is currently celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. Mork says it's full-bodied and a good week, as opposed to a good year, and he'll put it on ice. Mindy says they can eat as soon as her frozen peas and pearl onions are done. Remo loves these exotic vegetables. So again, Remo's just a simple guy running a deli. She suggests that Remo make himself at home. As the men go into the living room, Mork tells Remo about Clarence Birdseye, who had a dream and froze it. He says that Clarence was the first man to make $1 million from frigidity, so another sex-related joke. Mork is carrying wine glasses. Mindy follows them with a bottle of wine. She tells Remo that Mork's really into commercials. Mork says it's only because he wants the best for those he cares about. And here's to good friends. I'm just going to say right now, I vaguely remember a lot of these commercials in the sense that the slogans rang a bell, but I could not tell you which products they were in most cases. The slogans, after more than 40 years, kind of stayed with me, but I don't really remember the commercials. And there are a ton of references in this episode, understandably. The contemporary audience, including me at the age of 12, would have gotten these jokes. I don't know whether a current viewer of any age would. I mean, you get the gist of them. As Mindy pours the wine, she says, "Watch it, Mork. You're beginning to think in 30-second blurbs." Because most commercials were about 30 seconds at that time. They had been longer, I think, in the 50s and 60s. And there would actually be a trend toward longer commercials that look like music videos in the later 80s. Mork begs to watch TV, just a touch of video in the night. Repeatedly in this episode, he refers to television as video. The word video did not yet have the other meanings it would pick up later in the 80s, such as videotape and music video. Using the word video for television is something that dates back to the 60s. He says, "Pretty pleased with sugar substitute on top." He tries to put his head on her stomach, but she gently pushes him away. She tells Remo that Mork has no sales resistance. Remo says that's the trouble with the world today. People don't know what they want. But not this fella, not Remo da Vinci. He never buys anything he doesn't need. Mindy wonders about that strange aftershave Remo wears. He asks what's so strange about English vinyl, and I think that's a play on English leather. She says there's nothing wrong if you don't mind smelling like a chair. He says it's a man scent. Maybe there's a reason a man might want to smell like a chair. I don't know. Smelling like a chair doesn't really sound that bad to me. Depending on the chair. Mindy says the reason is the overstuffed girl in the commercial. Remo admits that that's right. He likes her too. We remember that Remo was really looking forward to watching the Stag movies, and he was interested in the two blondes that Mork brought home the evening that Mrs. Da Vinci came over. I don't think we ever find out anything about Remo's love life, but he definitely has a type, let's say. Meanwhile, Mark is twitching and acting like he's going through withdrawal. He claims he's all right. He scoffs at the idea of being hooked on ads. He can go weeks without seeing them again. Days, eons, epochs, light years. And yes, light year is not technically a measurement of time. They had a chance to say Bleem, but they didn't.
Who would like to start now, please? Please, let me just watch a little bit of TV, please. Just a touch of video. Come on, I miss a little mountain lion going. And a little doughboy going. And a 20 bowl man going, dive, dive. Please, when you're going.
Ciao, ciao, ciao. Ciao, ciao, ciao. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Flap, flap, please, please. Everyone, ready, please. Please, please. Can't you see another looky-loos looking for Mr. Goodwrench? And Frank Gifford looking for Jimmy Hoff on a dry sack on the rocks. Please, look.
Inside your taste buds with the super soft drink. It's cool and refreshing with just
I'm utterly baffled by the Mountain Lion ad. I don't remember that. I did, of course, place Poppin' Fresh Dough and Tidy Bowl. Chow Chow Chow, I believe, was Meow Mix or some other cat food commercial. Plop Plop Fizz Fizz, of course, is a famous Alka-Seltzer ad, and I think he's doing it as Mick Jagger. The Looky-Loos, I thought this was a local ad in Southern California, but maybe it was national. It was about when you're selling your house and you get people who just like to go and look at open houses and they don't want to buy, and they're called Looky-Loos. And so that was for a realtor, I guess. So I remember that, and I kind of remember it was animated. Oh, Mr. Goodwrench in 2011 was replaced by GM in the US with Cadillac, Buick, Chevrolet, and GMC certified service brands, according to Wikipedia. But certainly in 1980, that would have been a well-known brand. Frank Gifford was a football player, actor, and TV commentator, and he died in 2015. He was married to Kathy Lee Gifford in 1986. Looks like she was his third wife. Jimmy Hoffa, of course, was famously disappeared, and he was a union leader people were looking for because of the strange circumstances of his disappearance. So not technically an ad. And we can see more of Mark's addictive behavior, and Mindy just looks like she doesn't know what to do. There's a nighttime exterior of the house, and the upstairs light goes out. But we go to Mr. Bickley's apartment, which is lit only by his TV. He's in his robe and pajamas, clutching a sofa cushion. He bites it and says he hates the taste of kapok, which is a cotton-like plant fiber. Oh, it's used for stuffing mattresses and pillows, for padding and cushioning. But he bites the cushion again because the movie he's watching is so scary. Someone knocks, and Mark says it's the Invisible Man. Bickley goes to the door and turns on the living room light. He can't see Mark and says that he thought that he was joking, but Mark is just out of sight. Bickley asks what Mark is doing here. It's after midnight. Mark calls him good old lovable Mr. Bickley. He says he was passing by and smelled Bickley's television, so he thought he'd come in and watch a little bit with him. Maybe just a few minutes. Mr. Bickley asks him why he doesn't watch upstairs, and Mark says your ceiling's in the way, so being very literal. Mr. Bickley asks why he doesn't watch his own set. Mark says Mindy is making him go cold video, like cold turkey, and he clutches his arm, either because he's cold or because he's going through withdrawal symptoms. Bickley pushes him out as he pleads. He knocks again, and this time he says it's Bourbon Delight, which is like Chicken Delight, so it's like he's pretending to be a bourbon delivery. Bickley, who we've seen in earlier episodes, has a drinking problem, cheerfully tells him to come in. Mark lets himself in. Bickley says he thought he threw Mark out. Mark says he can go back upstairs and practice tap dancing in his roller skates. Bickley lets him stay, but he wants him to be quiet. Mark says thank you. They sit on the couch and watch TV. It's Invasion of the Body Grabbers, the original and scary version. As we can guess from the title, this is not exactly a parody, but a variation on Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The original version of that came out in 1956, and they had remade it fairly recently in 1978. Bickley says that it's about alien beings who come down to Earth, so Mark says, oh, a documentary, even though he's still not out as an alien to Mr. Bickley, so it's just a little joke to it himself. Bickley says that the aliens come here to take over our minds and bodies and control us. Mark wants to know why, and Bickley says, shh. Mark says, that's not a shush, it's a drunken snake. I didn't know what that meant, but okay. The announcer comes on. Bickley says that Mark babbled all through the movie, and now it's the commercial. Mark tells him to be quiet. Bickley says it's just a commercial.
Look, hers is definitely wider. Take the shirts! Take the shirts!
They're bozo.
Well, we'll have to change the channel. We'll find another commercial.
Feel the side panel.
Whoop,
Stretch
son of a gun,
the
if she
side.
suddenly
More
isn't
support
shapelier.
against
Look at that!
Oh, now, darn, the movie started already.
Oh, bummer.
Now I won't know whose mind is being controlled and whose isn't.
Oh, let me look for some more commercials then.
If your pet refuses to
No wonder he's finicky. He's been dead for over a year.
So the Which is Wider thing was a laundry detergent ad. I don't remember which one, but we've watched this pile of clothes in this detergent and this pile in the other one, and then Which is Wider. And this was actually done on a Brady Bunch episode. And then the other one sounds like it's an ad for a girdle. I don't remember when girdles were phased out. It seems like they didn't last into the 90s. Even in the 80s, they weren't common. It was mostly something that older women wore, but you would hear references to them on TV. Bickley unplugs the TV to watch it in bed. He lifts the TV, and then Mort goes into the bedroom to fluff up the pillows, so like they're going to share a bed. And then there's another nighttime exterior of the house. The downstairs light is still on. Bickley in voiceover tells Mort to get out of here and go to bed, in case you're wondering if anything slashy was going to happen with them. We cut to Mork and Mindy's living room, and the lights are still on, so I assume that Mork left them on when he went downstairs. Although it seems like usually the lights are on in the living room on this show for whatever reason, even though there's an energy crisis. Mork yawns. He looks at the clock, and we get a close-up of it showing that it's almost 1:40. It was after midnight when he went downstairs. I don't know how long he stayed. I mean, was it an hour? Mork says it's getting late. He wonders if Mindy's asleep. He opens her bedroom door. He says, "Mindy's bare." And we're supposed to think B-A-R-E, like she's naked. But then he takes out a teddy and says hi to it. The audience goes aw and claps. He says it's time for the teddy to be in bed. So he punches it in the nose and says something about ozone. And then he drops on the floor and then he closes the door. Kind of hostile after this cute moment with the teddy bear. And yes, apparently Mindy kept her teddy bear. Didn't we have a name for it? Mr. Snuggles or something? I'm trying to remember. Mork says that Mindy is asleep and he's a free man again. He laughs triumphantly but quietly. He goes to the couch and says it's time for a little advertising. He flips through a magazine but finds out that Mindy cut out all the ads. He says it's Zen advertising, so another Zen reference. He says, "What good are these magazines? There's nothing in them but articles." He throws the magazine on the floor. He says it's time for a little Mondo video. And this might be a reference to the 1979 movie Mr. Mike's Mondo Video, which was directed by Michael O'Donoghue, who was one of the original Saturday Night Live writers. It featured Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, Gilda Radner, and Sid Vicious. He turns on the TV and settles back on the couch. He yawns. The announcer says we'll be back in a moment with the exciting conclusion of the invasion of the body grabbers, but first this word. At that time, there were still the three big networks. There was also PBS, as we will be reminded in this episode, but there wasn't really much cable at that time. And of course, there was some local programming. So it's not that surprising that when he turns on the TV, he's watching the same thing that Mr. Bickley was. We get a reverse angle. We see a fern in a pot on a stand, and it's next to the TV, which has Mr. Bickley on the screen. He's wearing a white suit. We can see the wicker chest with magazines and other objects on it, and we can see the back of Mork's head and a bit of his suspenders and the top of the couch. Mr. Bickley says, "Friends, can I have your attention?" And then less friendly, he says, "Your attention, please. That includes you, fella, sleepy on the couch." Mork wakes up and says, "Who, me?" There's a closer view of the TV screen. Mr. Bickley says, "Yes, you." And then, more nicely, he says, "How'd you like to have everything you ever dreamed of?" Mork thinks that sounds pretty wonderful. Mr. Bickley says that Mork can join him in the promised land. Mork wonders if he'll need shots. So, immigration travel joke? Mr. Bickley says, "Come, Mork, we've been waiting for you." Mr. Bickley's arm reaches out of the TV. Mork goes over and climbs into the TV. We see them on screen, shaking hands. Mr. Bickley says, "I think you're going to like it here, Mork." They turn away, and Bickley puts his hand on Mork's shoulder. And appropriately enough, we go to commercial in more ways than one. When we come back, there's a shot of the TV screen with green and black static. The set is the inside of the TV set. Everyone's dressed all in white and standing and talking in pairs, including Remo. Each person has two small TV antennas coming out of their hair. Mr. Bickley escorts Mork in. He says, "Welcome, Mork. I'm Mr. Persuasion, your TV guide." So a play on the then indispensable magazine that showed you what was coming up on television. He says that this is the promised land where everyone has everything they need to be happy and content. He tells the others, "Friends, we have a guest." They all say hi. Mork says they all look like Ray Walston, which was a nice little in-joke because it's playing on My Favorite Martian, and of course Ray Walston would soon be seen on the big screen playing Robin Williams' father in Popeye. Mr. Persuasion suggests that Mork mingle and hear the interesting words that everyone has to say. He'll be back after their short messages. Mrs. L.W. from Bangor, Maine introduces herself, and that was a thing I think in 60s and 70s commercials where you wouldn't get a real name, you'd get initials, and it probably wasn't who they were anyway. Mork says Nanu Nanu. She has him look at her hands and the hands of a young woman with similar hair to her. She's holding a container of dish soap. She asks him to guess which one of them is the mother and which one of them is the daughter. And again, I don't remember which detergent it was, but it was something about, oh, it makes your hands so soft that they don't look old, and so you can't tell whose hands are whose. And you would like see a close-up of the hands, and then you'd see the faces, and oh my gosh, that young-looking pair of hands belong to the mother. Something like that. Mork says that the younger woman looks like a mother, and I didn't know, like a mother? Or if he was implying that she was an unwed mother, the daughter in any case looks offended. Mrs. L.W. says, "Wrong, I'm the mother. My hands used to be rough and red. Then I discovered Sparkle Dish." And she loves the way that her hands feel now, and she rubs them on her face. An off-screen male voice says, "Me too." The man who is dressed sort of like a doctor or pharmacist comes over and takes her hand. He says, "I think I'll keep her." And I think that was a reference to, maybe it was Geritol. "My wife, I think I'll keep her." I remembered this from a Sylvia cartoon that was making fun of sexist ads. The woman tells Mork to get some today. And he says, "I thought you were with him." Like he thinks she means get some sex. This man puts his hand on Mork's shoulder and wants to talk to him about irregularity. Mork says they'll get together and talk over a prune Danish sometime. There were a lot of laxative ads, and apparently this was kind of controversial when they started in the 50s, but by the 70s and 80s it was just one of those things you took for granted. There's a little boy in shorts, and he even has a white catcher's mitt and a white baseball. He says, "Hi, mister," and Mork says, "Hello, little fella."
Fun, aren't they?
Yes.
But they grow up so quickly, and I'm going to see that he grows up right. I care about my child, and that's why I give him Princess Goo Balls. Here.
Thank you.
The ingredients in each Goo Ball are pure and provide much-needed energy, and even may build a bone or two.
Hiya, pal. Put her there.
I can't. I'm covered in goo balls.
Well, you could if you use one of these. Wonder Wipes. One wipe removes grease, grime, dirt, and that gooey, sticky stuff. You know, I use 100 of these every night instead of taking a shower.
So I don't remember which ad this was about, oh, they grow up so fast, but that kind of rang a bell. And I have to point out, in the background it looks like it's his ass pitcher, but it's actually glass pitcher. I'm not sure what Princess Goo Balls specifically refers to. It's interesting that Mork doesn't seem to recognize Remo, even though he was reacting to Mr. Persuasion as if he was really Mr. Bickley. It's sort of like the season premiere where Exidor and Bickley and Mindy showed up as other characters, but there he thought that they were this world's people rather than the parallel universe characters. And I had said of the Looney Tunes and Morky Melodies episode that Remo wasn't given much to do, so I did think it was nice that J. Thomas got more lines than usual in this episode, gets to do some ad parodies. A woman in a gown and a boa comes over and says, "Would you believe I'm waxing my floor at this very moment?" And I remember an ad of, "Would you believe that I'm cleaning my oven?" I don't know if there was a waxing my floor. The oven one, though, has kind of stayed with me. Although, again, I don't know the product. Was it Easy Off, maybe? Mork says he wouldn't really believe it. She tells him to step this way, and some Mork slips on the floor. He says now he would believe it. She says it's new wax and slide floor polish, and she holds up the container. There's no need to buff. When people's pants bottoms will do the job. Mork gets up and says, "You people all seem so happy here."
Oh, well, the joy of living here is that for every problem, there's a solution. Or a gel.
Samantha Harper was Mrs. LW. She was active from 72 to 86. Cheryl Bolt was the Gooball saleswoman, and her only other credit is White Shadow in 1979. Gavin Muir plays the boy, and his only other credit was a CBS Afternoon Playhouse in 1982. Terrence McNally had a longer career. He is the laxative salesman here, and he was then 31. His IMDb credits are from 77 to 2006. But the guest star that I most recognize is 38-year-old Alice Borden, who is the floor wax saleswoman. She was then 38, and she had played Ruth Bauman in the later seasons of That Girl, where her character was married to the Bernie Capel character. And she did a memorable guest shot as Lois Borden, no relation, the ex-wife of Howard Borden on the Bob Newhart show. Her career ended in 1989, and she has a nice offbeat kind of comic timing, very dry at times. I wish that she had a little more to do here, but it was still nice to see her. Mark goes over to Mindy and asks what her problem is since she's looking at her hair. He suggests flaking, itching, or peeling. She says no, it's split ends, and he says, oh, you sell girdles. So I already talked about girdles. She confides that she's Mindy. Unlike the situation where she was Mandy in a parallel world, she is somehow herself in his dream. She tells him to run while he's got the chance. His life is in danger. I'm not sure about it being in danger per se. I mean, he's not going to die, but they are trying to up the stakes. Mark doesn't believe her because these people are wonderful, although he admits that it seems like they're on serious medication. She says this isn't what it seems. She leads him across the stage, and behind what I think is a cathode tube, she reveals that she's not one of them. Her antennas are fake. And he says, whoa, falsies. Like rubber worn under a bra to make a woman's chest look bigger. Bickley returns with what looks like a very simple remote, and of course it's white. He says that their break is over. Their programming will now continue with their American Dream slogan number 47, and everyone has gathered to face him. They recite, buy a lot, spend a lot, twice. Mark wants him and Mindy to make a run for it. They try, but she knocks the tube over. All of the ad people point and call Mindy a non-believer, so now advertising is being compared to a religion, which was also implied with the Promised Land thing. This hellish version of heaven, I guess it is. And then everything slows down and Mark escapes, but Remo and the laxative man pull Mindy away. And then there's a dissolve back to the living room. Mark is yelling for her to run, and so Mindy enters from the bedroom wearing her robe. She goes to Mark on the couch. He hugs her and asks her to hold him. She rocks him back and forth a little bit. Mark says it was really awful. He was being chased by people with little TV antennas in their heads. These people were after both him and Mindy. They were all controlled by a man called Mr. Persuasion, who looked a lot like Mr. Bickley. It was really awful. Terrible. Mindy says she told him not to watch TV. She turns the TV off. She says there's nothing that can hurt him anymore. She suggests he go upstairs and go to bed. He says KO. She says goodnight and goes in her bedroom, but I know she doesn't close the door. He looks at the TV and says, video, like he's disgusted with it. There's a knock, and Mark answers it, even though it's the middle of the night. It's Remo, and he's still in his ad costume. He says he's been looking for Mr. Mark. Mark backs away and protests. He says it isn't real, it's just a dream. Remo says there's nothing artificial added. Mark continues to object and back away. Remo wants him to join us in a world free of fear, anxiety, and midriff bulge. All the ad people start appearing out of the armoire, at the front door, from the attic, the kitchen, and downstage right, whatever that is. And they're all chanting, join us. Mark tries to flee, but he has nowhere to go. He cries for help. Mr. Persuasion says he will help him, but he can't do anything until Mark is one of them. Mark wants his free will. Mr. Bickley says, you know nothing is free, unless you buy the giant size first. He puts his hand on Mark's back and says, perhaps you'll reconsider after a little friendly persuasion. Wouldn't you like to be looked up to by everyone you meet? Mark says he was once on the planet of the dwarfs. So since it's his dream, it's okay that he's admitting that he's an alien. Mr. Persuasion says a person of discriminating taste like you deserves the very best. Wouldn't you agree? Mark starts to agree, but he catches himself. And he says something about weather alert, heavy snow job. He tells Mr. Persuasion, no sail here, clone prince. And that's at least, I think, the third use of the phrase clone prince. Mr. Persuasion thinks that Mr. Mark might be more responsive to appeal number 2. He snaps his fingers. Remo tells Mark he'll never go to the prom with breath like zoo dirt. And that hair, it's so dull and lifeless. Mork says he thought it was short and sassy. I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember who this was who had the short and sassy haircut around 75 or 76. I feel like it was a female Olympic athlete, and I actually had that hairdo. I wanted to say Kathy Rigby, but it could have been Nadia Comaneci. I don't know. And of course, Mork's hair is not short for a man, although it is pretty sassy. Remo tells Mork to join the in crowd, and he'll smell fresher even after a busy day. Mork sniffs his own arm and says Remo's right. Mork is kind of an active guy.
Come on. With our help, you can be really fun to be near.
Yeah, I think that'd be kind of... Wait a minute, no way. Think public television, PBS. There's no place like Cabot. There's no place like that.
Once again, things are getting a bit shippy with Remo and Mork. There's another Dick Cavett reference, and of course another Wizard of Oz reference. PBS did not have advertising, although they did have sponsors. Mork laughs triumphantly at being free again. Mr. Persuasion says that's an impressive display of control, but this one never fails, and he snaps his fingers.
Hey there, big spender. If you use the right shampoo, I'll do this. If you use the right aftershave, I'll do this.
Maintain.
And if you use the right toothpaste, I'll do this.
What happens if I buy everything in the store?
Do you believe in heaven?
Maybe. Well, maintain. Whoa. Disregard previous maintain. Time to boogie. Let go. Oh, come on now.
Glad to have you with us, Mr. Moore.
And this is, of course, a commentary on sex selling things in advertising, but of course it's also very shippy for Mork and Mindy, and of course she's going to get to him. And I thought it was interesting that although she's very sexy, her dress is not low cut, but it exposes her back and her arms. And we get them kissing for the first time in what feels like a long time. And he is doing his thing of maintain, where he's trying not to let her get to him, but then he gives in and decides he'd rather boogie than maintain. Then Bickley controls Mork with the remote, and there's a ring around the collar reference. And then Mork says that he's Jean-Claude Killy for Billy Dean Pure Pork Sausage. And I don't remember what the skier Jean-Claude Killy actually advertised, if he did. But I do vaguely remember the Billy Dean sausage commercials. And then the green lummox ho-ho-ho thing is a reference to the Jolly Green Giant, and his friend was Little Sprout, I think. And of course it gets kind of macabre with him stomping on his little friend. And then Mork does an ad for the Rosalind Rood speed speaking course, which was a play on the Evelyn Wood speed reading course, which I think we had a reference to in season 1. And the irony here is that Mork isn't actually speaking that quickly. Mr. Persuasion congratulates him and says that he's doing fine. He's about to become a full-fledged consumer. Mr. Persuasion keeps hitting buttons on the remote, and then products start falling from the ceiling. Mork, as if he's hypnotized, says, "Buy more, and then he sinks to the floor in the middle of the products. Then we cut to Mork on the couch, and he's still crying more, but then he starts calling out to Mindy. And then she emerges from the bedroom, and she's again in her robe. She goes to him on the couch, and he starts to embrace her. Then he says she's not going to sucker him with that one again, and he jumps to the end of the couch. She realizes he must have been having a nightmare. He says he was, and she was in it, and he calls her Hot Hips, which, of course, made me think of MASH with Hot Lips, but I thought that was very much an acknowledgement that he finds her sexy, and he's a little bit scared by that even now. He wonders when this horrible thing is going to end. She says he's awake now, so he has her pinch him on the arm, and then he yells out. He says he couldn't sleep through that noise, like he would yell and wake himself up from the noise. He checks her head for antennas and then sighs in relief. He says it was a horrible dream. People were trying to make him buy things. And then he yells the word buy several times. She says nobody can make him buy things. He says Mr. Persuasion can, and ads can because they're so big and strong and they make such nifty promises and they're so nice to you. She says not if you're a thinking buyer. Just be selective and use your own judgment. He says he wants everybody to like him, which is consistent with Mork. and Robin Williams for that matter. He says he wants to be part of the Peppy generation, playing on the Pepsi generation. And also I thought of, I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too, which is very catchy set of commercials starring David Naughton about conformity, although it's also about a wide range of people buying this soda. And those are on YouTube and they're still utterly delightful. Unlike a lot of these commercials that have just faded away, and I barely retain any of them. She says people don't like you for what you own. They like you for what you are. So he says, what are I? She smiles, comes closer, and puts her arm around him. She says he's weird, but semi-likable. And of course, she more than semi-likes him. She says the next time the urge to buy comes over him, he should just ask himself, is it necessary? Does he really need it? He rehearses this, apparently as a Shakespearean actor and then Truman Capote. And it's at least the second or third time for each of those. She turns on the TV so they can try it out. The announcer talks about crunchy potato chips, delicately salted and mouth-wateringly good. It's the crispy taste that everyone loves. How can you say halt to Mr. Salt? Mindy asks Mork what he asks himself, and he says, do I really need it? And she asks, what is your answer? And he says, damn straight! And he tries to get up off the couch, but she yanks him back. With difficulty, he tries again and manages to say no. She turns off the TV, and then she gets a bag of potato chips. He's glad she likes potato chips, because he has a surprise. He opens the armoire, and it's filled with potato chip bags. He said he really needed these because he filled her bathtub with clam dip. Presumably she doesn't take a bath before going to sleep. Or he did this in the middle of the night before he went to Bickley's. She smiles and gives him a playful shove, and that makes him fall on top of the potato chip bags. He laughs. There's a nighttime exterior of the house, and the lights are on both upstairs and down. And I'm just going to assume it's a different night. Mork summons Orson, and in his head he's watching a white portable TV, and he's sitting without furniture, and he's eating something. He calls Orson the Great White Hoax, which I think is a play on the Great White Hope, but I didn't get what it meant in this context. Like, he thinks that Orson is fake. I don't know, there's just some odd stuff going on around the color white in this episode, which would have made more sense if Mindy had had a black and white TV. But I think that was because it was this hellish heaven thing going on. This week, Mork learned about advertising. Orson warns him that Orkans are vulnerable to Earth powers of persuasion. Mork knows that, especially since Orkans don't have bathrooms. And I didn't get this the first time, like, what is being persuaded? But what he means is, in the days before VCRs and heavy use of remotes and so on, and cable TV, people would use commercials as bathroom breaks. I mean, I think people still do that somewhat, but we have more control over it, avoiding advertisements. The implication is that because Orkans, for some reason, don't have bathrooms, they would have to sit there and just watch the commercials. And yes, it's the third episode in a row that involves bathrooms. And we also had the thing about laxatives. My God, what must that be like to live on a planet without bathrooms? No wonder he's happier on Earth. Mork says advertising is nothing to be afraid of. Without it, there'd only be Julia Child saying, and then he does an imitation of her saying, and I won't try and do Julia. Today they're going to make chicken lips au gratin. And of course, Julia Child was one of the most successful TV series on public television from, I think, the early 60s on into the 80s. Mork says, besides, advertising tells us about new and wonderful things to replace our old and wonderful things. Without it, Farrah would be just another faucet, and that is referring to the Farrah shampoo commercials. She was very famous for her hair, and yes, it's a pun on faucet. Orson worries that Mork has an insatiable craving to buy everything. Mork admits that he did it first, but then he learned a valuable lesson. The greatest energy crisis on Earth is a shortage of willpower.
For example, if there's something on television you don't want to watch, you simply just press this button.
And that's a very ironic ending, considering that the ratings were going down that season and many people decided, you know what, I don't want to watch this. But this episode isn't bad. It's obviously very conflicted because it is on network TV and they do have sponsors and you don't want to alienate them. But at the same time, you want to teach kids a valuable lesson about being responsible consumers, and yet you also want to get laughs from referring to many popular commercials of the day. And the reason why I didn't look all this up is because these commercials did influence me somewhat. Obviously, I wasn't buying everything. I wasn't buying cars. But I remember the slogans. For a while, I remember the products. Some of that still is with me more than 4 decades later, but not as vividly as it was then. The episode's kind of walking a tightrope. Advertisements are horrible, but they're wonderful. Certain ambivalence written into all of this. If I remember correctly, one of the things that brought Pam Dawber to Gary Marshall's attention was a shampoo commercial. Commercials, like so much else of that time, provide nostalgia. In some cases, the products no longer exist, but even when they do, we don't see them in the same way. I rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how well it delivers what I'm looking for in the series. I'm going to have to go with a 2.5. It's not a hilarious episode. There's some cute moments to it, but like I said, a lot of the humor is faded away because it's just such an episode of its time, and yet it's not really hitting those particular nostalgic notes that I would want. But it is, in a sense, a time capsule. Like I said, I was glad that Remo had more to do. Mr. Bickley does nicely with his Mr. Persuasion role, and he plays it sort of like a game show host, but with a bit of the Mr. Bickley grouchiness, which we also see when Mork bothers him in the middle of the night. But definitely Mr. Bickley has mellowed since the first season, because a year ago he would have been a lot more ticked off by this. We get to see Pam Dawber be sexy and sensible, and so that's cool. And again, we're being reminded that Mork is somewhat childlike. He's very trusting. He believes what he sees on TV. I also rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, which measures how well it supports the Mork and Mindy romantic relationship. I've got to go with a 2. Although the episode is not centered on their relationship, certainly there is a lot of her caring and concern and trying to help him and teaching him, and that could be seen as parental. The seduction and kiss aside, there's also an element of partnership, and they try and save each other, so that's sweet, although the stakes are not really as high as they were in the season opener. His life isn't threatened, it's his individuality, which is disturbing, but not on the level of his life. She still gets to him, and that's very cute. So yeah, I would say it's about in the middle. This, unfortunately, has not turned out to be a terribly shippy year. I didn't remember specifics before I went into this season, and so I couldn't remember what happened in season 2 and what happened in season 3. I'll talk about this more in the season wrap-up. And she comforts him, and he turns to her. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily an episode to skip. You may want to do a deep dive after you watch it and find out what all these commercials were. There's probably some website that lists at least some of them. Like I said, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just see, what do I remember? And how does this episode play for me now? 2.5 eggs, 2 hearts. This is Paula Schaffner with episode 47, Invasion of the Mork Snatchers. Calgon, take me away!
This is a pearl. It's one of the simplest, loveliest forms of nature. I like the idea of nature. You know, being natural in everything, especially my hair. So I use liquid Prel. It lathers like mad and then rinses out completely. It leaves no deposits in my hair. All it leaves is the shine, the glow, the natural beauty of hair itself. Liquid Prel for natural beauty. Like my pearl.
Photomat wants to show you some pictures you never saw before. Pictures most film developers don't give back. Maybe you overexpose them or underexpose them, but that doesn't make them any less precious to you. So Photomat has a no-fault photo plan. We print every printable picture. And if you don't like them, we'll reprint them or refund your money, no matter whose fault it is. Because at Photomat, your photo matters.
Give me one good reason why I should stop shaving and use Neat Hair Remover.
How about razor stubble?
Razor stubble.
With Lemon Neat, there's no shadow of razor stubble on legs or underarms. Razors can only cut at the surface. Neat removes hair beneath the skin. So days later, instead of razor stubble, you're neat and clean.
Now I can go sleeveless without worrying.
Neat for days of silky smooth skin without the shadow of razor stubble.